You're probably all familiar with LINQPad. If you're unfamiliar with how to use it in the more basic way, there are a couple of video presentations. If you go to LINQPad.net, there are links then to the O'Reilly presentations on LINQPad, so you can get a feel for the more basic use of LINQPad. I'm going to start with a very quick 2-minute sort of introduction to the basics. What you can do with LINQPad is attach to a database. In this case, we can attach to SQL Express, and that's pretty much all you have to do is simply add connection to a database. Here we are. We've got a collection of databases in our server.
Joe?
Yes?
You need to share your desktop.
You can't. Okay, let me. Okay, I've got a slight technical issue here. Let's have a look.
There we go. Thank you.
Great. Okay, you can see me now?
Yes, we can see you now. Thanks.
Great, okay. Right, so what we've done is added a connection to SQL Express, and this is a very basic database we've got here, the nutshell database. We've got customers, products, and purchases and purchase items. So if I want to query that using LINQ, we can use the right click, bring up a context menu, and bring up a predefined little snippet there for querying. So from PM products, where p.description contains the letter A, and I'm going to select those columns in the product table. In fact, let's do this with purchases as well. It's going to be more interesting because this has got some related information in there. So where p.description contains A, and I'm also going to put in there the customer name. So there it is. So we've done a quick query now. We've done a LINQ to SQL query, and we've not had to build up a type data context or anything to do that. LINQPad's done that behind the scenes. Now, in the latest version, there have been a few extra features. One of them is that we've improved the LINQ to the SQL translation. So not only can you see the Lambda translation, Lambda method syntax translation of your query, you can also see the SQL translation, and it's now been improved so that the parameters are formatted in such a way that you can actually execute that straight away as a SQL query. So I can either show that as a new tab and execute that now. Here it is. Or we can go back and execute that in SQL Management Studio. Now you might wonder, why do we want to run that in SQL Management Studio when we've got LINQPad? And SQL Management Studio does have one or two useful features. Not many, it has one or two. And one of them is that you can do an execution plan. Here it is. And so this is very important because if you're trying to produce performant queries in enterprise applications, you need to get an idea of is the SQL that's being produced by LINQ to SQL or Entity Framework, is it quality SQL with good execution plans? And this way you can determine that very quickly and easily. Now there's a few more features as well we've added. I'm going to also look at what I've just done to the auto-completion engine because there's some new features there. Now with LINQPad, you don't just have to use it for querying databases. You don't even have to use it for querying or for LINQ. You can use it basically to execute any bit of C# or VB code. And a while ago I just wanted to generate an RSA public key pair. So what you can do is, the class is called RSA. Now, that class RSA is in the system.security.cryptography namespace, which LINQPad doesn't import that by default. So what we can do is, we've got a little smart tag that's appeared, and if you've got auto-completion, you can either use the mouse or your favorite hotkey from Visual Studio, import that namespace, and then we can call create on that, and then we can call toXML string. Yes, we want the private parameters. Run that, and now we've generated a public-private key pair, and that's much more easy. That's far easier than doing that in Visual Studio. Now you might wonder, where has that imported namespace gone? And if you go to the Query menu under Advanced Query Properties and Additional Namespace Imports, that's where it adds the extra namespaces. Now another excellent example of when you might want to do this is in developing a regular expression, because it's quite difficult just to remember all the syntax for regex. So you know that you've got to use regex, and I want to use matches. The thing I want to match is something like in the end, win, in. Okay. Now how many times does the word in occur there? So I'm going to have to do a word break in another word break, and then we're going to need to use regex options dot ignore case, and then we're going to get the answer. There should be 2 matches there, which is indeed we've got, one at 0, one at 15. And this is a really easy way to then develop that regular expression and tweak it. You get instant feedback, and you probably also notice that in typing that, the auto-completion experience is now completely on par with Visual Studio, enums and everything else. Something else I did recently is I wanted to use the registry, and I can never remember how to do that because I use it so rarely. So registry again, we need to import that particular namespace. Then I want to do, local machine, that looks good. Now, how do I get at all the keys? Get subkey names, that's what I want, so we run that. Okay, software, that's the one I want, so probably want to use the indexer. Okay, there's no indexer there because auto-completion doesn't come up with anything. So it's probably, open subkey. That's it, software. And then I can get the subkeys on that as well. So what you can do now is you can build up your code to access the registry, to read or write to it. And as it becomes more complex, you can change the language to statements. That lets you build up multiple statements, or program, and now you can actually define additional methods and classes as well. And so you end up with something that you can just paste into Studio, and you've saved yourself a lot of time in developing that. A lot of people are interested in dynamic languages, and part of what's appealing is the dynamic experience in the development, the interactive development experience. With LINQPad, you're getting that dynamic interactive development experience, but with the full static type safety that you've got in C# and VB. Now, one other new feature that's been added is the ability to look at the IL translation as well for any query. Now, someone contacted me recently because there was a bug in their program. It had a memory leak, a very subtle memory leak, and this was what they pasted me. That they sent me this in an email, and so I just pasted it into LINQPad, ran it, and indeed the result at the end of this is you get true, which implies this weak reference is alive, and that implies that basically we've got a memory leak insofar as this particular Lambda expression is not getting garbage collected. And I wanted to know why. All I had to do was click the IL tab, have a look what's going on here, and we can see there's actually a little optimization that C#'s doing. It's caching the delegate for that Lambda expression in a static field, and that's what's deferring the garbage collection. I was able to see that straight away just by clicking on the IL tab. And again, that's quite a lot easier than creating a console application in Studio, compiling it, going to Reflector or ILGASM and so on. So that's a basic overview of the minor new features in LINQPad. And now I'd like to cover the major new feature, which is support for querying Entity Framework. Now, most of you will know what Entity Framework is. If you haven't heard of it, you can think of it as an object relational mapper that's very similar to LINQ2SQL, but has got some extra functionality. And that extra functionality comprises a layer that sits between you and the database. And that layer means that you, rather than querying the database directly, you're querying a domain model. So you're querying something that works at a higher level. You can use inheritance and composition and so on to create something that's slightly more abstract and more conducive to domain-driven programming. Now, to create a domain model, to create the entity framework model, you need to go to Visual Studio, and I'm going to do that right now. And you can either create a class library or a console or Windows Forms or WPF application, doesn't matter what. I'll call this one EF Nutshell. And what I'll do is I'm going to create an entity data model that works with that simple nutshell database that we just did. So what we do is add a new project item, choose ADO.NET Entity Data Model, and choose Nutshell. Generate from database. And I'm just going to choose customer, purchase, and purchase item. So this is going to create a very simple. Now, typically, you wouldn't leave it at this. The whole idea with Entity Framework is that you can do lots of things to make this more elaborate. Unlike with Link to SQL, which is a bit simpler, you kind of leave it. With Entity Framework, you tend to do more complex things. But for now, all I'm going to do is simply to pluralize these entity sets, because by default, it doesn't do any pluralization for you. So that should be customer, should be purchases, purchase items. Here we are. And build that. And that's all we have to do now in Visual Studio. Now I can start querying that in LINQPad. So what we do is click Add Connection, and then in this new combo, we change the data context from automatic to Custom Entity Framework Object Context. Now, everything that I'm doing for the Custom Entity Framework Object Context is also supported for Custom Link to SQL contexts. So you can now query the custom Link to SQL context that you've tweaked as well in Visual Studio. So we now browse to the DLL or the EXE, and it's EF Nutshell. Bring that DLL up. And now it asks what particular type and what entity data model do we use. And in this case, we've only got one defined, so just pick it from the list. And it automatically infers the connection details. It mines the application config file and finds that information. We can test that if we want, and that works. Click OK, and now we'll find the query. So we can look at the schema here and see that customers has a one-to-many relationship with purchase, and that has a one-to-many relationship with purchase items. So let's do a query on that. So I'm going to start off with purchases. I want all purchases where, what should we do? Okay, let's take the purchase items. I only want purchases that have had at least 2 purchase items. Now, one problem we've got straight away is that property is not being pluralized. It's screaming in my face. That's a singular, which I think is kind of confusing. So I'm going to go right now and fix that and pluralize that entity set property. Now, if we go back to Visual Studio, you can see that although we've pluralized the entity set here, we also need to pluralize it in the navigation property over there. So I'm going to do it there, and I'm going to do the purchase items here as well. Rebuild that, and then go back to LINQPad. Now you'll notice that it's immediately updated it here and here in the schema view, and the auto-completion service as well is updated immediately. You don't need to manually refresh. Also, when we rebuilt that project in Studio, you notice it didn't have any problems insofar as we didn't lock those DLLs. LINQPad didn't lock up those DLLs. Okay, so we want where purchase items dot count is greater than 1, or else we could do something more elaborate like dot sum pi dot price is greater than $1,000. Okay, now what shall we project? Let's just take the description, and what else? We can let's put the total number of purchase items. And I want to also know what who the customer name was. So I'm going to go through that property there and go into the name. Okay, let's run that. And there we've got one match. Now, a good thing about this, about using LINQPad to do this query, is that you get the SQL translation for this. So you get the full SQL translation on what it did. And that's a quite complex translation, isn't it? So we're selecting from C1, which selects from another projection, which includes another subquery, which selects from another projection, which has another subquery, which then, and plus the left outer join. Okay, it doesn't look very good to me. This is where the Analyze SQL might come in really handy to look at the execution plan. Here's what we can do. How about we switch over to Link to SQL and look at compare to translation. Now all we have to do in order to do that is drag the nutshell database over onto here, and this will use our automatically generated Link to SQL data context. Run that again, and now that's the translation that Link to SQL does, and that was kind of more what I was expecting. Now that I mention it, Link to Entity Framework is known for not always having very efficient SQL translations. Now I know they are working on that for Framework 4.0, so in the next version of the framework we can expect to see better SQL translations in Entity Framework. But this is what we've got at the moment. Now, if we go back, let's go back to the Entity Framework and run that again. This is particularly useful, this translation, insofar as that there's really no other way to get it. There is a technique where you can cast to an object query and call to trace string, but that doesn't work if the query ends in an aggregation or an element operator. So if I stick first in there, straight away that little trick of calling to trace string doesn't work. The only other way you can get this translation is to spin up SQL Profiler, right? And that can be quite painful. So this is a really useful tool to make sure that your query is actually producing efficient SQL that's going to work, that's scalable. Now the other thing you can do with this is write eSQL queries. So we can set the language here to eSQL, and I'm going to select, not star, you're not allowed to do that in eSQL. I'm going to do select c.name, comma, c.purchases from nutshell entities.customers as C. So that's all the customers' names and their purchases using eSQL. Put the result there, and I can also look at the SQL translation for that as well. Okay, now I'll do one further thing to demonstrate the functionality of Entity Framework, and that's I'm going to bring in a slightly more complex entity data model. So we'll go back to our Studio, and I'm going to bring in one of the samples that comes with Entity Framework, and this is Course Manager. Here it is. So we can see we've got a number of tables in there, and we've got some in one-to-one relationships and in many-to-many relationships, such as person and course are in a many-to-many relationships. So I'm going to build that, and we're going to go back now to LINQPad. Add a connection. We'll choose Custom Entity Framework Object Context. Hit Browse. And this time we'll go back to Source and go to Course Manager. And once again we can choose the entity data model and the type name. Now this assumes, of course, that you've embedded your EDMX into the project. object, which is the default for Entity Framework. If you've not done that and you've got the separate files, you can click this option in here and browse for the individual CSDL, MSL, and SSDL files. In this case, we're going to use it from the same assembly. Again, it's inferred the entity data model string, and it's inferred the correct database. Test that, it works, hopefully. Yes, it works. And click OK. And now we can see in here, in calls, that we've got a many-to-one relationship, a one-to-one relationship, a one-to-many relationship, and a many-to-many relationship. So we'll do a new query there. So I can put where c.person.any, so I only want courses where there's people enrolled on them. And I want to select the course ID, title, credits. And I also want the department's budget in there. So let's run that now. And here we are. And these little things here, if you click them, it'll give you a graph. It'll bring up a little bar graph. So that's it in a nutshell. That's how to use LINQPad to query custom entity framework EDMs and object contexts. Now, I've not talked sort of about, some people have asked about link to SQL versus entity framework, whether they should use one or the other. And there's been a number of other people that have also forwarded questions. But what I might do is sort of go back to the floor now and give it back to Catherine to ask people who are present if they're interested in asking any questions. One thing I will warn you is that I've done fairly extensive work in design and implementation in Link to SQL. And so I can answer some detailed questions in Link to SQL, but I've not done the same thing for Entity Framework. So if you're going to ask me some sort of question on how does the association set work inside UEDMX, I'm just going to look blank and not be able to help you there. So, but anything else that you want to ask, feel free, and I'll hand it back now to Catherine.
Thanks, Joe. A couple people asked questions earlier, and there's been a lot of discussion in the chat window, so I just want to ask you, if you've asked questions earlier and they haven't been answered, can you please repost them now? So there was one, so take your time and do that. And let me see, and John Flynn was just asking, it won't be coming to LINQPad then. Okay, here's one from Paul. He said, now you have to forgive me if I don't get the terminology right here. Maybe you can see this too, Joe. It said, did the .dump extension go away with the new version?
Can I see the question in the, is it possible to get to the...
Yes, in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, you have a little... So click on the one that looks like a cloud.
Okay.
No, not that.
Not that one?
No,
this
up
one
above
here?
that, the little curve, yeah, right there. And you'll have a chat panel there. One looks like
okay. Right. Okay. This one here, Coplex search for SQL.
No, down at the, oh, Paul sent it to me privately. Let me resend that.
Okay.
There we go.
Did the dump extension go away with the new version? No, certainly not. It still works. So we can use dump. We can turn that into a statement and put dump in there.
So Joe, I'm sorry. We're not seeing you now. You switched back to this window. So
okay.
Can you go back to your desktop?
Share desktop.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, can you see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, dump is alive and kicking. Yep, that's definitely working. So there's no issue there.
Okay. So then we have another question. Is it possible to enter lambda syntax and get the from X and Y select X syntax?
No, it'll only go from the query syntax into lambda syntax. It won't. There's no facility to go from lambda method syntax into query syntax. So that would be an interesting project. I mean, some people have tried to write a system to translate from SQL to query syntax. I don't think anyone's quite succeeded at doing that. It might be easier to write a project that goes from lambda method syntax to query syntax. Even then, it would be, there's certain subtleties you'd have to deal with.
Okay. And here's another question from Lawrence. Can you show us a left outer join in link to entities? He says, I know that was problematic at one point. Has it been addressed?
Okay, I can't answer that in detail, but that query you've got right there is a left outer join. Right, there's one, there it is. So whenever you reference a parent table, implicitly you're doing a left outer join. So a lot of people, they think in SQL and then try to translate that to LINQ. In fact, when you're thinking in LINQ, you tend not to think so much in outer joins versus inner joins. You just think in getting the data you want, and you let the query translator come up with the right joins. In this instance, it's done a left outer join for us.
Okay. More questions, people? Okay, John is asking, can you show an example of chained includes to load multiple navigation properties? I know you can do this.
Okay, now, to be honest, my knowledge of Entity Framework will probably let me down here, so I might have to say no to that request. Now, someone said there was a problem there, but if you contact me about that, I'll have a look at it. I suspect there could be a problem with a particular namespace not being imported. It sounds like the most plausible reason for that. Now, you can always test that. If you go to Query and Query Properties, you've got the ability to put extra namespaces in there. So if it's a namespace issue, you can just enter it in there.
Okay, good enough. And Don is saying he's unable to locate the sample database. Where can he get those?
Okay, do you know which sample database? Did you say which sample database?
Don, can you tell us which one it is? We'll wait for him to answer. And then Reza, I think that's how you say the name, said, in the last video you mentioned you hated data sets. Can you elaborate on that?
Data sets?
Yeah.
The principle, I believe, of those data sets was good, but the implementation wasn't great. I remember, I mean, it was a long time ago since I've actually used data sets, but if you want to transfer it between tiers, a data row is not a first-class object, so you can't just transfer it like a customer from one tier to another. You've got to wrap it inside a data table and then wrap that in a data set. I find it was very clumsy to work with data sets, but the principle of an offline store is quite good. There is, of course, the issue now is how does that relate to Entity Framework and Link to SQL, because trying to deal with those APIs in an n-tier application at the moment is a little bit troublesome. There isn't really an out-of-the-box solution for doing that. They're just talking about that at the moment for Entity Framework and looking at solutions for that, but there's nothing out of the box at the moment for doing that.
Okay, and Don got back to us about the database and said that it's the C# NetShell sample database. That extracts itself automatically. So all you need to do is go to any of the samples in here, and just bring them up. So if you bring the
bring up README first, it's going to unpack that database and bring it up in the tree view straight away. Now if you wanted to stay there, you go right click, go to properties and just put remember this connection, and that will stay there forever.
Oh, good. Good. And let's see, let me go back. I have a couple here. So Lawrence is asking, is the link he's just curious, is the LINQPad user interface written in WinForms or WPF?
That's a good question. Actually, I wrote it, I really was torn between them because in one sense WPF would have been a better option. It's actually written in WinForms, and part of the reason was that there were a few niggling quirks about WPF that I really didn't like when I wrote this. I think they may have addressed those quirks now, but at the time I could just get a smoother looking interface with WinForms. If I was to write it again, I would definitely use WPF because WPF to me is faster, you can be more productive. Just writing, for instance, if you take something like this preferences, dialog, or query properties, doing that in Windows Forms there's a lot of work you've got to do with docking and getting everything to line up and making sure it works with large fonts, creating table layouts. That's so much easier to create forms that actually work in real life in WPF than it is in Windows Forms. And certainly if I was to do it again, I would do it in WPF.
Okay, and then Paul was asking, let me check, make sure. Okay, Paul was asking, what features are you working on now? What new features?
Good question. The ones probably on the top of the list, one of them is automation, in that some people, the motivation has come that the people are using LINQPad for scripting, and then they want to drive it from the command line. So they want to call the command line to execute a LINQPad script and have it write the results somewhere. Now I'm taking that a stage further and actually going to make LINQPad a library that you can reference and actually automate from another .NET application as well as being able to do it from the command line. So that's going to open up some more possibilities. Also, a lot of people have asked the ability to pipe the results to either CSV or XML or XHTML, so they can pipe those results out and then for reports and so on. There's also the Framework 4.0 version, which I'm working on as well, which will then support all the Framework 4.0 features.
Okay, good. I think people like that. The response has been positive. So Steve is asking, has anyone heard anything more on Oracle supporting Entity Framework? It's not related to LINQPad, but just a question. You probably
I've not heard
don't know the answer.
Oh, I've not been looking. Yeah, I've not really been looking at that.
That's not your area. And then, boy, John has said something else about the includes, and I don't even know how to read this without everyone laughing at me. He's saying, try this, and VARS equals courses.include, and then you can. Are you switching back to read this?
Okay, I can try. It may not work, but we can try. VARX equals courses.include.
Courses.include, yep. And then in parens, department, and that's in quotations too. And he said you'll see the include is missing. And he says,
so I need to make that a statement.
Okay.
Okay. So, and then what he's saying, I think what he's saying is that it doesn't that you do another include here. I'll have to look at that. I don't know why it wouldn't do that. I suspect it's a namespace thing. It's a question of importing another namespace. But yeah, I can't really comment without looking at that further.
Okay. And John says bingo. Which I don't know how to interpret that. Any more questions, folks? Now's your chance. Okay, Jason's asking, can LINQPad do writes as well as reads?
Definitely. Well, it supports everything in Entity Framework and LINQ-SQL. So if we want to, in this instance, as var x equals call stop first, then we can do x. We can change anything in here. So credits, plus plus, and then I think it's called save changes, and that will then write it back. And similarly, if you're using, we have to go to Nutshell and use one of the automatically generated data contexts in there. Same thing, I can go customers dot first dot name equals whatever through. You wouldn't really write code like this. You'd do a more elaborate query there, but anyway, you then do submit changes, and then that will write it back. Similarly, you can go customers, this is something more realistic, dot insert on submit, and then new customer, and then ID equals 120, and name equals blogs. And there we are, and then we can do the submit changes, and then that would then insert a customer.
All right. And then Carl is asking, how is the documentation about LINQPad? I know it's excellent because you're a good writer, but perhaps you can tell him where to find it.
Yeah, at the moment there's not a lot of documentation. The best documentation you've got is in fact the samples and the 5-minute induction. You've got the documentation there, and there's not a lot, but it does get you started. Something else to check out is the keyboard shortcuts. There's a lot of useful things in there to make you more productive. And in terms of using it with Entity Framework, which is what we talked about today, if you go to bring up the LINQPad.net, I've just added the LINQPad and Entity Framework, so a tutorial on how to set this up with LINQPad with Entity Framework. Now, it probably does need some more documentation, so that is somewhere on the to-do list.
Okay. Now, so let's see what Carl was saying. He just wanted to make sure that it's sufficient to be able to take advantage of all LINQPad's great features, and I think it probably is. But you answer questions, don't you, Joe?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Now, Paul is asking, does LINQPad have any issues with the thread pool or running multiple threads from an ad hoc script?
There should be no issues. You should be able to start up as many as you like. It does create a new application domain. It runs each query in its own application domain. If you want to create new application domains, there is a catch there. You need to use linkpad.util, create app domain. Otherwise, the application domain that you create will be dysfunctional. In terms of creating new threads, you can just go ahead and create it. You can just put new thread, and off you go, or you can thread pool.queue user work item, or you can use asynchronous delegates, or however you want.
Okay, and Lawrence wants to know if there are any plans to support LINQ in Hibernate. At
the moment, there are no plans to support it in terms of first-class support so that it will appear in this list here, but you can add a reference under Query Properties. You can add a reference to the DLL that contains your custom data context, and you can query it through that. I can certainly consider adding first-class support for it. First-class support means that you actually get to see it in this schema tree view here. But in order to do that, I would need to know that they've actually finished the project, because when I last checked, LINQ Hibernate was sort of half written.
Okay, and Andrea says, Joe, you said that Entity Framework doesn't produce well-performing code on SQL Server, at least if compared with link to SQL. So the question is, if we're starting a new large project, which technologies should we use, in your opinion? Entity Framework or link to SQL? And should we
That's
rely...
very interesting.
And she also adds, should we rely on plain old stored procedures for fine-grained performance?
Okay. It is an interesting question. Now, Entity Framework isn't bad in all of the SQL it produces, but sometimes it does produce some inefficient SQL, and I've seen worse examples of that. I have heard one case where they had a project, and they had it running in SQL, so they upgraded to Link to SQL when that came out, which was great. They were more productive. They got more stuff done. Then, when Microsoft made the announcement that they saw Entity Framework as the way forward, they ripped Link to SQL out and put Entity Framework in. That meant that the queries that were previously running quickly and were now running, some of them were running really slowly. So after all that, they ended up then replacing some of those queries with original SQL queries. So they went in a full circle, from SQL to Link to SQL to Entity Framework and back to SQL again. And I think that's crazy. If you've got an application, you're using Link to SQL and it's working well for you, keep it linked to SQL. I don't believe there's any hurry to upgrade to Entity Framework. My advice is, if you've already got it written, to upgrade when they've written Framework 4.0, if it indeed meets the performance needs that you've got, and it has some important features that you actually need. As long as Link to SQL is meeting your needs, there is no need to upgrade. It won't rust. Right? They're still committed to doing minor improvements to it as well. Now, in terms of brand new projects, this is something where different people will disagree on this. Personally, I would, if it was a new project right now, I would look to see, will I benefit from the features that Entity Framework offers that Link to SQL doesn't? Now, if the answer is yes, I really will benefit from those features, then I would use Entity Framework. If the answer is no, I'll be very tempted to actually use Link to SQL now, and then possibly migrate to Entity Framework in the future, or maybe just keep it in Link to SQL forever. I mean, Microsoft have a long strategy of data access technologies. We've had RDO, DAO, ADO, ADO.NET, Link to SQL, Entity Framework. In a few years' time, there'll be something else, and whether you use Link to SQL or Entity Framework, it's going to be old hat. And when you're looking at both of those technologies through the rear-view mirror, then it really doesn't matter which one you picked. What matters is that the one that you picked actually worked for what you were trying to do at the time. Were you productive? Was it producing good SQL? Did you get paid by your client? If it's working for you, it's a good fit, use Link to SQL. I wouldn't be bullied into using something because you've been told that Entity Framework is the way forward or whatever. I don't know if that answers your question.
Good advice. That makes sense to me. So let me see. I'm going through here a few comments about that. So let's see. Reza is asking, what's the status of integration with P-Link?
Okay, P-Link, LINQPad supports that in the CTP that was released.
Okay.
What's happened with P-Link now is it's rather like what happened originally with Link, in that they released it as a standalone CTP originally, but now all the new updates for P-Link are part of the CTP for Visual Studio 2010, which is part of the CLR and Framework 4.0. Now currently LINQPad doesn't support Framework 4.0, so you can't use the very latest technology, the latest P-Link release with LINQPad, although that situation won't remain for very long. In fact, as soon as the first beta comes out, which I would suspect in the next month or two, then you can expect to see a LINQPad beta for Framework 4.0 soon after that. If you want to experiment with P-Link, with the CTP that was released earlier, then you can certainly do that. And there's instructions, I think, in in the FAQ on how to do that.
Okay, excellent. And Andrea, whose question you answered before, said that was a great answer. Thank you very much. And let's see, I think we're running out of questions. Carl, who asked about documentation earlier, asked if you have a blog or someplace where other people can contribute documentation on their own.
At the moment, the only thing that I've really got is the O'Reilly Nutshell forum. So, but it's not really a place where people can sort of. You're probably more thinking of a wiki than a blog. So maybe it's worth setting up a wiki. Maybe that's something I should consider.
All right, and then Alexi is asking if it's possible to download the whole presentation alongside with all the chatting. And I'll tell you, you can go back and watch it in the WebEx viewer. It's kind of clunky. I'm not a big fan of the WebEx viewer. I shouldn't say that because we're using WebEx. But the best way, if you want to keep the chat, is I usually tell people is just to copy and save it on your own. So the best way to do that is just to click in the chat window, select all, copy it, and then paste it in a text editor or something like that. And I do that after each webcast. So if you don't get a chance to grab it, you can email me. I'm webcast@O'Reilly.com, and I'll send it to you. And I'll also send everyone a link as soon as the recording is up, and that'll be in a day or two. And then Reza is asking you, what's the next book you're working on, Joe?
It's C# 4.0 in a nutshell. It's an update, and it's largely similar to the 3.0 in a nutshell, but we're adding support. We're adding chapters for TPL, for Task Parallel Library, and P-Link, and all the new C# 4.0 features, as well as quite a lot of minor improvements we're making to the book.
That's great. I don't know what the ETA for that is. Do you?
Well, we're having to be very careful to time it, because we're waiting for the next beta to come out, and then when that comes out, then we'll probably set the release date at that point.
Okay. Okay, sorry. I should know that. I work for O'Reilly. It's hard to keep up with. It's hard to keep up with all the books. I usually have to check a report. So, well, that's good news. I'm glad to hear it. And people are saying kudos to Joe. Been using LINQPad for some time now and absolutely love it. And another person said discovered it by accident and saved countless hours trying to work out issues that LINQPad did for me. Thank you. So
that's wonderful.
Everyone's saying thank you, and it'd be good to pay you for the license.
Indeed.
Indeed. All right. Well, I think that we've kept you up probably late enough, and the questions are starting to. I think we've answered all the questions. And
yes, that is the real time.
I just want to say thank you very much. And people want to know what's the best way to contact you if they need to contact you. Do you have an email address they can use?
If they go through my website, either LINQPad.net or Albahari.com, there's a contact page on there where people can contact me.
Okay. Okay, that's LINQPad. I'm typing.
You can also do it from here. You can go help, and you can go, here we go, report bug or make suggestion.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, good job. Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you everyone else for joining us. And again, if you want to grab the chat window, just select all, copy, and paste it in a text file, and you've got it there. And I'll let you know once the recording's available. Okay?
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Joe. All right. Goodbye.